NFL Films senior producer Greg Cosell, who comes on with us. Greg, thanks so much for being with us today. We broke down corners last week. We're going to break down some offensive linemen this week. But before we get started with the prospects, we wanted to ask you about an offensive lineman that the Buffalo Bills just signed, Forrest Lamp, who was with the Chargers last season, started in all 16 games. What do you think he brings to the Buffalo Bills, who already have a pretty decent room in the offensive line room?
Yeah, it's funny. He was a guy that when he came out of Western Kentucky, and I remember watching him, he was a 4-year starter, and he played tackle. And he got caught up in that same deal that happens every year now, Maddie, where there's tackles in college, and a lot of people say, well, they're guards in the NFL. And the problem is you do have to line up with 64 tackles every week in the league. So not everybody is a guard, and not everybody has the sweet feet and the length of the Joe Thomases of the world. There's not 50 of those guys. So Lamp ended up being a guard. I thought he was solid. I mean, the Chargers did not have a very good O-line overall last year. I think he's more than likely a multi-position backup type that you could play at guard. Probably put him at tackle if you had to. And who knows, maybe you could line up and take some snaps at center if you really had to as well. But he's certainly a guy that has experience in the league. And he was a former pretty high pick. And, I think it's a good move. You're looking for competition, and you're looking for guys who can play multiple positions. That's what's critical when you're looking for depth on your offensive line.
Why do you see this happen so much, going from college to the NFL, where guys are labeled as a tackle but changed to guard, or vice versa? Why is it so much that they're labeled this way, and then in the NFL they change to a different position?
Well, there's two things about tackle that are pet peeves of mine, given how much NFL tape I've watched for years and years and seeing the evolving and changing nature of the NFL game. Number one is the NFL game now, there's much quicker passing games. 3-step drop, quick 5-step drop, more RPOs, more quicker shotgun throws. This is not, back, 20, 30 years ago when Steve played and there were deeper drops and you were asking your tackles to pass protect on an island for 3.5 seconds. So there was always a thought that, boy, your left tackle had to be a great, great athlete. And your right tackle was kind of more of the plotter with lesser feet, lesser athletic feet. To me, the game's totally changed. To me, there's no delineation anymore between right tackle and left tackle. And your tackles, yeah, you'd love them to have sweet feet, but they don't have to, because the nature of offense is different. And, everybody wants Joe Thomas, but Joe Thomas had great length and sweet feet. There's not 50 Joe Thomases. So a lot of these kids who come out of college are not great, great athletes. In fact, you've got a couple in this draft. You've got Slater from Northwestern. You've got Vera Tucker from USC, who actually played guard a year ago in 2019. They're not guys you would normally look at if you look at the paradigm from 20 years ago and say they're offensive tackles. But I think they'll be offensive tackles, and I think they should be in the NFL.
Give us a little bit of a rundown of is there a couple of, and certainly the Bills maybe aren't in this position, but are there is there two, is there 5 guys that say for instance, that premier position we all talk about, left tackle, are there guys in this draft who are you say, yeah, there's the guy right there, and who's going to get plugged in at left tackle in the NFL and play? Anybody?
Yeah. Oh, for sure. I mean, obviously, Sewell will. I think, to me, the kid I like, but he's not going to be there at 30, is Christian Darrisaw from Virginia Tech, who I think does have sweet feet, does have really light athletic feet, but does play with physicality and power. So again, I'm not good at mocks. I don't say where he's going to get drafted, but I think he's a really good tackle prospect. If you start moving down the board, you start getting into guys who I think are solid players. Like, I'm real curious to see where the Texas kid, how he's thought of, Samuel Cosme. He's a longer athlete. To me, he's more athletic and finesse than pure power, but he's not a weak guy. He's just long and athletic. So he's a very interesting guy later on. You have a kid like Jackson Carman from Clemson, who I'm sure a lot of people are going to say is a guard because he's not a great, great athlete. Alex Leatherwood from Alabama falls into the same category. But these guys played tackle for most of their careers in college at pretty high levels. I mean, Alex Leatherwood played guard in 2018, but was the left tackle for Alabama for the last 2 years. To me, I think you start him out at tackle. And, if the Bills are really interested in a tackle at 30, I think the Carmans, the Leatherwoods, my guess is they'll be there.
Well, let's start off with some of those tackles. We've talked about Tevin Jenkins a little bit in previous weeks on this show, and we've seen him be mocked to the Buffalo Bills at least a few times. So what stands out about Tevin Jenkins as an offensive tackle? What did he do at Oklahoma State that you liked?
Well, he's very aggressive and competitive. He's one of those physical guys. He's a better run blocker than pass protector. He's got really strong finishing traits. He's nasty. He's a tone setter. He's the kind of guy that when I watched him, and again, I'm not necessarily thinking of the Bills. We'll see how they play offense, but my guess is it won't change dramatically. This offense will run through Josh Allen, not the run game. I saw him as a guy that fits best on a team that wants to run the football as their foundation. He's a physical tempo setter for an offensive line. And that's always in demand because you want your offensive linemen, as Steve knows, to be like that. You want them to be nasty. But I don't think he's as strong in pass protection as he is as a run blocker. So I see him more as a little bit team and scheme specific. And he's another guy that would not surprise me if some people said, no, he's a guard, because that's the way he kind of plays. He's more physical. He does have pretty good length, though. It's not as if he's short and squatty. I mean, he's 6'6", 317, and his arm length is pretty good. So I think he's a tackle to start, but we'll see.
We've had this conversation, Maddie and I, about quarterbacks and all the skill positions and running backs in particular just a few minutes ago. But there's a prospect in this draft, Dillon Radunz from North Dakota State. And
yes,
North Dakota State, I get there's guys coming out of that conference a lot or on a regular basis now. And we've had the conversation about guys getting overlooked because the competition's not there, they're not on national TV, or at least, in fact, you can say that most casual fans of the draft don't go deep enough into these smaller schools or different conferences to find out about guys like this. Tell us about this guy, Radunz, and how he might fit into the NFL, where he might go and how he's perceived.
So I guess, Steve, you're assuming that I have done that work, huh?
Yes, I am. Yes, I am. I'm counting on it.
And I have indeed.
Absolutely counting on it.
And you'd be right. He's going to be a fascinating projection. I think he's going to be a little bit all over the board. And I'm going to throw something out to you that I'm sure people disagree with me, and that's okay. I like to think reasonable people can disagree about this stuff and not be disagreeable. I thought that he was a really highly efficient left tackle at his level of college football. They featured a more conventional run game. They featured more conventional play action than almost all college programs. But I watched him and I thought, I'm not sure he's going to block NFL pass rushers on the edge. I know he did really well at the Senior Bowl and people spoke about his athleticism. I don't fancy myself, believe me, as an offensive line expert. But I didn't think he showed great looseness in his core. Like, I just worried watching his tape that, is he going to block those guys on the edge? And this is crazy because this guy's on your team right now. But I almost saw him like Mitch Morse. When Mitch Morse came out of Missouri to the Chiefs, he had started 38 consecutive games in Missouri at tackle, and they made him a center right away. I almost saw Radunz the same way that he could be a center. Now, again, I may be in the minority, and maybe people see him as a tackle. But I kind of thought, boy, he struck me as a guy that could move inside to center and be really good.
You talked about Alex Leatherwood a little bit before we got into some of these names and someone who could be available at that number 30 spot. And Alabama is known for their offensive line, especially this past season, and how they were able to block for a quarterback like Mac Jones, who's not as mobile and who doesn't get out of the pocket as much as some of these other more athletic quarterbacks that we're seeing in this year's draft. What did Alex Leatherwood succeed at in Alabama and blocking for Mac Jones?
Yeah, he's another kid that, you don't look at him and say he's a high level athlete for the offensive tackle position, but he's really solidly built. He's got really good size and mass. He's got a really good body profile for the position. Obviously, they threw the ball and they had deeper drops. So there's really three kinds, if you're being general, three kinds of pass sets. There's the quick short set, there's what they call a 45-degree angle set, and then there's the vertical set on deeper drops. And the vertical set is the tougher one for guys who are not great athletes because there's a lot of space between you and a wide 9 speed rusher. And when these wide 9 speed rushers can build up speed and stride length, if you can't move if you don't have lateral movement, it's tough. He struggled at times with that. But I would say his movement was more than functional. I don't think it was a liability. So you have to decide again, is he a tackle? I think in terms, when I watch guys, sometimes they remind me of someone. He kind of reminded me a little of Dwayne Brown, who's played in the league a long time at left tackle in terms of the size and the measurables. I think he has much to work with at tackle, and I would see him as being drafted to play on the outside.
Yeah, that says a lot because you're right. I mean, when they start talking about guys in the NFL as coming out and being a tackle, it's really about measurables, is it not?
To a large extent. I mean, everybody looks at arm length. And by the way, his arm length is good, Leatherwood. There's no issue there. I think, I'm sure I don't do this, but I'm sure there have been studies done by every team regarding arm length, that how much of a factor that is for tackles. Because I forget what the actual arm length number is. That is sort of the delineation point. But Leatherwood's above that. His arm length was 34 3/8, and that's above the point. That's fine for a tackle.
There's another tackle from Michigan I wanted to ask you about, Jalen Mayfield, who's coming out. He's been mocked to the Bills. He seems to be in that gray area where he may be there at 30, maybe there later. I don't know. But
right.
What are your thoughts about Mayfield and where his prospects would be if the Bills indeed were in a position to get him?
Yeah, he finished his career with 15 starts at right tackle. Unfortunately, got hurt this year. He opted out, then came back, but unfortunately got hurt after 2 games. He's another guy. He's got excellent size and length. The arm length is not quite what you want. I thought he was really good as a run blocker. I mean, he to me, that was the strength of his game, but I thought that he was solid as a pass protector. One of the things you look for on the edge, or I look for anyway, and I've obviously spoken offensive line coaches, is you look for guys' ability to reset their hands. Because obviously, you're playing against a guy who's moving, a pass rusher. He's not just going to say, here I am, just block me. So you have to be able to reset your hands based on how the pass rusher uses his hands. And I thought Mayfield did a really nice job in his vertical pass sets of resetting his hands to maintain control of the rep and to stay in phase, to stay composed and poised. So to me, he's a really interesting prospect. And he hasn't played left tackle in college. So I think he'd be a right tackle just because that's his comfort level.
Out of the names that we've looked at and maybe haven't even mentioned yet that you've done some film study on, is there one of these offensive linemen that you think could fit in to this Buffalo Bills offense and the style of play that Josh Allen has, with it being a passing offense? Your short throws, your longer throws, he's moving outside of the pocket to make plays. Is there one player who could be available at 30 that maybe really fits this offensive line that the Bills have?
Yeah, and again, Maddie, I don't know who will or won't be available, but I would look at the player I started with, Cosme from Texas. He's 6'6", he's 314. For a guy that big, he ran an incredible 40-yard dash time of 4.8, which is kind of ridiculous for a guy that size. I think he's got really good athleticism and movement traits. You can make a guy stronger. You can't make him more athletic, so you can make him stronger. I think he's the kind of guy, and again, I don't know what Brandon Beane and Sean think. I don't know. I don't even know who the offensive line coach is, actually, so I probably should know that, but I don't know. But it becomes in the eye of the beholder what your offensive line coach likes, because I've talked to different ones, and it's amazing the different things they focus on. Every position has, a group of traits. It's just what the coach ascribes the most value to in the list of traits. And every coach might ascribe different values to different traits. So I don't know how the Bills O-line coach sees traits, but to me, Cosme is an athletic guy who's potentially a really good pass protector.
Talk a little bit about interior offensive linemen. Is there? We've got Cody Ford coming back off an injury. We've got John Feliciano, who just re-signed a contract. Obviously, we just talked about a guy like Forrest Lamp, who was signed as depth and as competition. Who is an interior offensive lineman who may be available at 30 and also come in and be good enough to maybe compete with those veterans?
Who are some names? I've seen so many guys.
Oh, yeah. It would be guys like Landon Dickerson, Wyatt Davis out of Ohio State.
Vera Tucker
Slater. From USC. Rashawn
well, then
Slater.
It depends on what you think of Vera Tucker. I love the player. Love the player. He played tackle his last year at USC, and I thought he played it really well. But he's not built the way most people think of tackles. But then again, neither is Tristan Wirfs, and he was a great right tackle for Tampa. Those guys are built compact and streamlined and a little dense. So it comes down to your O-line coach. How does he see a guy like that? I love Vera Tucker. I don't think he'd be there at 30, personally. Landon Dickerson's a really good football player. I think you could line him up at center or guard. He's had some significant lower half injuries, and that's another question that you have to decide when you draft a player. Can he be that guy? Is he going to get injured again? Wyatt Davis he's a fascinating guy because he kind of looks the part of a guard. And he played a grown man's game. I mean, he's got strength, he's got physicality, he's got competitive toughness. But I think he needs some work in pass protection. So now you have to decide with your offense and the pass game what kind of player you want, because you probably want guys who can pass protect. Now, you don't have to be a high-level athlete to play inside. You don't have to have sweet feet to play inside. You have to compete, but you have to have some athleticism. He's probably an average athlete, and that showed up in pass protection.
From all the film study that you've done, where does the depth lie with the offensive line in this year's draft? Is it a year where you're going to get a good amount of offensive linemen throughout, the first or second round, or is it a year where the good offensive linemen are going to be off the board pretty early?
Well, there's a lot of, again, assuming that people see them as tackles, there's a lot of tackles in this draft. I think you always hear every year, well, there's going to be a run at this position. Who can answer that? But there's a lot of tackles. So if people really want to tackle and they feel like, hey, three guys have just been, gone in the top 12 and, we need a tackle, then, yeah, that's how runs start. But I think this would be considered a really solid draft for offensive tackles. My guess is you're going to see a lot of them go by pick 45, pick 50. So we'll see. And again, we'll see if they're seen as offensive tackles. That's the big question. Because like I said, you do have to line up with offensive tackles. And you can say everybody's a guard, but, then you're left with three guys. And it's not going to be that way.
Greg, last one from me. We changed the subject, and right before we get off the air, I want to ask you about the trade that happened with Sam Darnold going to Carolina. I know you do a lot of film work, and you've watched all these guys in the league.
Oh, yeah.
Sam Darnold, with a new start, fresh system, a new surrounding cast, a little bit better roster around him. What do you think his prospects are going to Carolina, restarting his career? He's only 23, and he's got 3 years of experience. So what are your thoughts about that?
Well, I'm not going to speak to how he was coached because I don't know that. I wasn't there. But I will tell you what the film shows. And the film shows that he needs to work on a couple of things or he'll always be an inconsistent, erratic player. And one of the things he absolutely needs to work on, and this is harped on by I guarantee this was harped on with the Jets. I guarantee it. But he's got to do it, is he does not step to his throws. Your feet and your eyes have to work together. You must step to your throws. He's going back to his days at USC. He's had that issue. Now, like I said, I guarantee it was coached, but he doesn't do it with any kind of consistency. And that leads to a lack of velocity, and it leads to a lack of precise ball placement. You must step to your throws, and that's something that he must work on. He could be in the best system in the world with Joe Brady in Carolina with really good weapons, but if he does not get better at that, he will always struggle with his ball placement.
Very interesting. Greg, appreciate the time. Appreciate you telling us about all of these offensive lineman prospects. It's not the coolest position, but it's definitely a very important one. So thanks for doing all the homework for us so we could talk about some of these guys who could be available in the first round.
Thanks, Greg. Thanks again.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.